Picture this. A volatile group of three claw their way to a life of high status in a subsection of society with its own caste system. They work their way to the top by being the most ruthless, most devious. They work their way to the top by sinking to depths that morally decent people can't even fathom. Nobody is to be trusted. The same friend who's hugging you could have a knife at your back for all you know. This is Dan Pierce, and I think that Mean Girls and Goodfellas are pretty much the same movie. Both of these films revolve around a three-headed monster, and the three heads are made up of the three sides of the human psyche: the ego, the id, and the superego. Goodfellas even shows it on full display right on the poster. Jimmy Conway is the superego. He's sensible, and he always has a plan. Tommy DeVito is the id, reckless and overly sensitive. Henry Hill is the center head, the ego, the best and worst parts of his other two heads. An ego who is at the will of his counterparts. Mean Girls has four principal characters, but it is still a three-headed monster story. Gretchen Wiener is the superego. She's sensible and always has a plan. Karen Smith is the id. She's reckless and overly sensitive, or at least her nipples are. It's interesting to think of both Regina George and Katie Heron as the ego. The film begins with Regina as the center head, but then Katie cuts her head off and duct tapes her own head on top of the stump in the neck. Regina is an ego that is in control of both sides of the psyche. She runs the show. And then when Katie becomes the ego, she's much more susceptible to the other heads on the three-headed monster. Similarly, Henry Hill essentially gets to where he is by appeasing both the superego and the id. Both Henry Hill and Katie sacrifice their own backgrounds and moral compasses in order to get to the top. I mean, Henry Hill even becomes a Jew just to create this idyllic life.
Henry, what's the matter? You don't talk too much.
Why would he? He has both sides of his personality sitting at the table with him. This trio archetype is in a lot of other classic films, too, and it even presents itself in other art forms like music. The three sides of ego work so well as a relationship dynamic in stories because it actually happens in real life, all the time. These groups feel real because these personality types are naturally drawn together at a psychological level. You can make a whole list of movies that have that similar trio dynamic, but I also want to talk about how similar these movies are on just a technical level. They both have narration. Big deal, lots of movies have narration. A lot of movies get criticized for having narration. It's typically seen as a cop-out. Critics will usually say you don't need a narrator if you can just tell the story visually. But both Goodfellas and Mean Girls seem to be rare exceptions to the rule. Most people praise the use of narration in both of these films, and I think it's because they justify the use of narration.
It's a factorial, so you multiply each one by n.
Wrong.
Is that the summation?
Yeah, they're the same thing.
Wrong. He was so wrong.
Both films have great jokes that are sold by the use of narration. It's very comedically timed and very cheeky.
When I was broke, I would go out and rob some more.
Yeah, that's the word for it. It's very cheeky narration sometimes. You also can't blame the narration on cheap storytelling either, because most of the time, the narration is used in conjunction with what is happening visually. I could explain this in more detail, but I think just playing these two scenes side by side will do a better job of showing you what I mean.
There was Jimmy and Tommy and me, and there was Anthony Stabile.
How you doing?
Frankie Carbone.
Unfriendly black hotties. Girls who eat their feelings. Girls who don't eat anything.
And then there was Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy. And his guys, Frankie the Wop, Freddie No Nose.
Desperate wannabes. Burnouts. Sexually active band geeks.
And you had Nicky Eyes.
What's up, guy?
And Mikey Francesi.
That guy, yeah, I want to see him.
And Jimmy Two Times, who got that nickname because he said everything twice, like...
I'm gonna go get the papers,
Still not convinced? Well, let's explore the themes of both of these films, because I think that's really the thing that is most similar about them. These are both films that are exploring gender roles taken to the largest extreme. It's even in the title of both of the movies. Martin Scorsese makes guy movies, and there's not anything wrong with that. He's really good at it. In a career that's spanned half a century, of course he's branched out occasionally, but for the most part, his movies are about big boys doing guy stuff. There's been a lot of discussion of how Scorsese's films explore toxic masculinity, Taxi Driver probably being the most clear example. Goodfellas not only explores toxic masculinity, but also explores the potentially dangerous power struggle in male friendships, and the lengths that men will go to in order to prove their worth to other men. Mean Girls explores the exact same idea on the opposite side of the coin. Two different settings, two different generations, but essentially saying the same thing. It's not that men are exclusively toxic or women are exclusively toxic. People are toxic. Relationships are toxic when they're based upon personal advancement and social hierarchy. Now, it's not like I think when Tina Fey decided to adapt Rosalind Wiseman's book into a film, she said, "Hey, I'm gonna make Goodfellas but for chicks." I don't think she was actually directly influenced by Goodfellas. Honestly, if Tina Fey told me she hadn't even seen Goodfellas, I would believe her. It was 1990, she was probably watching Miller's Crossing. So I don't think any of these correlations between the films are intentional, but I think the connections you can draw between these two films are qualities that make any film great. Sure, a lot of it is great casting, a great script, and everything else that goes into a film, but a big part of it is also just science. The three sides of human personality has been intentionally used in art ever since it was coined by Freud, and you can even see the archetype in works of literature before Freud convinced everyone that he came up with it. The Three Musketeers, A Christmas Carol, these are the most clear examples of ego, superego, and id, and they were both written before we even knew what that was. So did Freud steal his theories from Charles Dickens? I don't think so. But I do think that it's interesting that these relationship dynamics are so fundamentally a part of the human psyche that we naturally were using it as a storytelling device before we even had a name for it. I think Goodfellas and Mean Girls are basically telling the same story, and if you don't agree with me, that's fine, because there's probably another voice in your head that does.
The fuck you looking at? Come on, make that coffee to go. Let's go. The fuck you doing? It's a joke, a joke. Put the fucking pot down. You gotta take the coffee.